Some messages are never released because timing protects them. Not everything that is created is meant to be heard when it is created. Certain ideas, sounds, and symbols are sealed, not out of secrecy, but out of accuracy. They wait for the right listener, not the loudest audience. What you are stepping into now is not a revelation of scandal or possession. It is recognition of resonance. In this story, the figure of a global artist is not a man. It is an archetype, a symbol of someone who heard frequencies others could not hear, who shaped emotion before language caught up with it, who carried sensitivity at a scale the world could not safely metabolize. Lost demos are not recordings. They are unfinished transmissions, ideas set aside because the environment could not yet receive them without distortion. This is how truth often survives. Incomplete, unreleased, waiting. You may recognize this rhythm in your own life. Thoughts you never shared. Insights you stopped mid-sentence. Creations you abandoned not because they were weak, but because releasing them felt premature. That instinct was not fear. It was discernment. Some material collapses when exposed too early. What survives is what learns to wait. And what waits develops depth. In the mythology of this narrative, the demos were not about one person's biography. They were about a pattern, the presence of someone whose impact would be misunderstood if named too clearly. So the material remained symbolic, abstract, fragmented. The message stayed hidden not because it was dangerous, but because clarity would have reduced it. Symbols protect what language cannot. This is where you enter the equation, not as subject but as receiver. Certain things only become audible when a matching frequency exists. Until then, they sound like noise, or they remain silent entirely. Your role here is not to claim ownership of anything lost. It is to recognize why pieces of truth begin to surface around you now, when they did not before. Timing is not coincidence. Timing is structure. The idea that something was about you is not proclamation. It is alignment. It suggests that the material was incomplete until someone capable of holding it existed. Not someone famous, someone precise, someone able to hear meaning without forcing interpretation. Someone who understands that not all secrets are meant to be exposed. Some are meant to be carried quietly until the system can handle them. In this symbolic frame, the demos were sealed because the world was listening for spectacle, not substance. What survives that era are fragments, melodies without lyrics, concepts without conclusion, messages disguised as rhythm. They wait for a listener who understands restraint, who does not rush to publish, perform, or explain, who can sit with unfinished meaning without demanding closure. You have felt this weight before, the sense that certain truths arrive already heavy, already layered, not asking to be shared, only to be held correctly. This is not uniqueness as status. It is uniqueness as responsibility. To hear something others cannot is not advantage. It is obligation to not misuse it. This beginning does not promise exposure. It promises attunement. The secret is not that something exists. The secret is how it exists. Unfinished, symbolic, protected by ambiguity. And the reason it approaches awareness now is simple. There is finally someone capable of receiving it without turning it into noise. This is not the story of a lost archive. It is the story of delayed understanding. And this first part is not meant to explain it fully. It is meant to establish why silence preserved meaning, and why meaning now begins to move. When something is withheld from public release, it is easy to assume fear or control as the motive. But within symbolic creation, withholding is often an act of precision. Certain material contains layers that cannot survive mass interpretation. When placed too early into wide circulation, it gets flattened, turned into spectacle, controversy, or product. The original signal dissolves. Those who understand this do not rush. They archive. They delay. They protect meaning through incompletion. In this framework, the lost demos are not missing files. They are moments where creation stopped intentionally, not because inspiration failed, but because reception was not ready. The artist archetype sensed this instinctively. When the environment could not separate sensation from exploitation, silence became the only way to preserve integrity. What remained unreleased was not weaker than what was shared. Often it was more exact. This explains a recurring tension you may recognize in yourself. The pull to express, countered by the refusal to dilute. You were never blocked creatively. You were guarded. When clarity did not yet exist around you, you withheld, not out of suppression, but out of care. This is the same dynamic at work here. The demos remained unseen because their meaning required a listener who would not reduce them to entertainment or identity. Symbolically, these unreleased transmissions were not designed to glorify anyone. They pointed toward a future convergence, a time when someone would recognize the pattern without personalizing it, recognition without possession, understanding without appropriation. That distinction is critical. Most destruction of meaning occurs when insight is claimed instead of carried. You may notice that what resonates now is not the idea of secrets becoming public, but the feeling of something long dormant regaining relevance. That relevance is not external. It does not demand proof. It registers internally as familiarity without memory. As if you are hearing something you already knew but never had language for. This is what resonance feels like when timing finally aligns. The symbolic artist did not leave instructions. They left fragments. Fragments avoid distortion. Fragmentation forces the listener to bring discernment rather than consumption. Only someone capable of patience can assemble meaning without rushing it into form. This is why the material waits for a specific posture, not a specific name. You're not here by chance. Feel the pull? Tap join to unlock truth, purpose, and a tribe that gets it. This is more than a membership. It's your calling. In this narrative, you are not chosen as a successor or subject. You are positioned as a receiver whose restraint completes what excess would have damaged. Meaning does not finish itself. It requires a compatible container. Without one, it remains sealed permanently. Now that incompatibility is fading. Pay attention to how this awareness unfolds. It does not arrive as excitement or urgency. It comes calmly, quietly, like recognition rather than discovery. That calmness is intentional. What is revealed through agitation rarely survives intact. What is revealed through steadiness integrates. This part of the story does not move toward exposure. It moves toward responsibility. To hear without rushing. To understand without announcing. To carry without exploiting. These are the only conditions under which certain truths resurface at all. The demos were never meant to be heard by everyone. They were meant to be understood by someone. And understanding does not make noise. What gives weight to this symbol is not secrecy, but containment. The I Ching speaks of vessels that crack when filled too quickly. Other traditions describe knowledge that burns when exposed without discipline. In this story, the lost demos survived precisely because they were never forced into completion. Completion, when premature, kills depth. Incompletion allows truth to remain flexible, waiting for a structure capable of holding it. You may recognize this pattern within your own history. Moments where understanding arrived ahead of explanation. Periods where you sensed meaning without context, direction without clarity. Rather than broadcasting these impressions, you held them. Not because you doubted them, but because you understood, instinctively, that sound without structure becomes noise. Silence, in those moments, was not absence. It was preservation. The archetype of the artist here represents sensitivity without shelter. A consciousness that picked up signals too large for its era to absorb cleanly. That sensitivity often appears misunderstood because the world confuses receptivity with fragility. In reality, receptivity at that scale demands more strength, not less. But without the right container, even strength fractures. The unfinished work reflects this truth. Certain signals could only survive by remaining fragments. This is where your position matters. You are not meant to complete the fragments publicly or interpret them theatrically. Your role is subtler. To let fragments inform posture rather than product. To allow recognition to adjust your movement, not your identity. The story is not about recovering something lost. It is about why something waited. When you encounter ideas that feel familiar yet unclaimed, resist the urge to label them. Labels compress. They force alignment into narratives that others can digest quickly but never integrate fully. Fragmented truth resists labeling on purpose. It preserves dimensionality. This dimensionality is what you sense now. Layers that do not ask to be explained, only respected. Notice that nothing here demands action. No call to speak, no instruction to reveal. That is deliberate. The moment meaning demands exposure, it starts serving attention instead of structure. What survives longest is what refuses urgency. This patience is not passive. It is protective. The demos, as symbol, were never meant to finalize someone's story. They were markers, evidence that resonance existed before the world had language for it. Resonance does not expire. It waits. And when the environment changes, it reappears not as sound, but as alignment. You may find that certain pieces of your life suddenly feel less random in this light. Periods of silence, delayed momentum, the sense of carrying something without knowing what to do with it yet. These were not errors. They were holding patterns. You were not stalled. You were buffering something that could not yet be transmitted. This part of the narrative does not elevate you into prominence. It situates you into stewardship. The responsibility is not to tell the world what was hidden, but to protect what should never be distorted. Understanding this removes the temptation to rush outcome. Meaning re-enters the world correctly only once. After that, it degrades. This is why restraint matters more than expression here. The fragments survived because someone learned when not to finish them. And now, recognition deepens. Not as revelation, but as confirmation. Something was never meant to be heard loudly. It was meant to be carried accurately. Accuracy, within this symbolic frame, is more important than expression. The I Ching, the fragments, the withheld material, all converge on the same principle. Timing governs meaning. Meaning released at the wrong moment does not simply fail, it mutates. It becomes something else entirely. This is why the story emphasizes what was not shared. Silence here is not a gap. It is a safeguard built into the structure of truth itself. At this stage, your role becomes clearer, not louder. You begin to understand why your life never followed a straight line of exposure or confession. Each time you approached articulation, something held you back. Not fear, not doubt, but an awareness that articulation would reduce what was still dimensional. Reduction is the real loss. Once meaning flattens into explanation, it can no longer guide from depth. It can only instruct from surface. The secrets in this narrative were never dangerous. They were unfinished. And unfinished things are fragile in environments obsessed with conclusion. The world wants answers. Structure needs coherence. These are not the same. You were shaped to feel the difference. When coherence was absent, answers felt irresponsible. So you waited. You absorbed. You let understanding mature beyond impulse. This phase explains why recognition often feels delayed in your life. Not because you were overlooked, but because premature recognition would have forced clarity into a form too small to hold it. Recognition attracts projection. Projection demands simplification. Simplification destroys nuance. The system protected itself by keeping you unannounced. What felt like delay was insulation. Now something shifts, not externally, but internally. You are no longer tempted to translate meaning for validation. You no longer feel pressure to explain what you sense. This is not detachment. It is completion of a conditioning phase. You have learned that your awareness does not require witness to be real. It requires alignment to remain useful. The symbolic artist could not complete those demos because completion would have served the wrong era. In the same way, you were never meant to finalize certain truths in earlier phases of your life. They were not incomplete because you lacked insight. They were incomplete because the environment lacked capacity. You were never meant to compensate for that lack by lowering resolution. What changes now is not the urge to speak. It is the ability to hold without strain. You recognize that being entrusted with certain things is not an invitation to display them, but a responsibility to keep them intact. This responsibility settles quietly. It does not energize the ego. It stabilizes the posture. You may notice that clarity arrives without urgency now. Understanding no longer demands action. This does not mean action will not come. It means action will come with structure. When it does, it will feel inevitable rather than dramatic. It will not announce itself as breakthrough. It will function as placement. This is also where external fascination loses relevance. The idea of being heard fades. What matters is not audibility, but correctness. Some frequencies are only meant to tune the internal compass. Broadcasting them would distort their purpose. The story does not progress toward exposure here. It progresses toward containment refined enough that exposure becomes optional, not necessary. This is why nothing is revealed in the conventional sense. Understanding is integrated instead of displayed. At this point, the secret no longer feels hidden. It feels settled. And when something settles, it no longer seeks attention. It simply becomes part of how you move through the world, shaping decisions silently. Blessed by His grace? Click Super Thank You and give $20 to spread His light. Your gift plants seeds that grow His kingdom. Be the blessing. When containment reaches this level, something important happens. Weight redistribute. What once felt heavy to hold no longer presses on you directly. It settles into structure, becoming part of how you move rather than something you carry consciously. This is the difference between burden and integration. The symbolic material was never meant to remain unresolved forever. It was meant to settle into posture before any outward consequence appeared. You may notice now that curiosity from others no longer pulls at you the way it might have before. Questions lose urgency. Attention feels distant, even irrelevant. This is not withdrawal. It is orientation. Once meaning stabilizes internally, external interest loses its ability to distort timing. You are no longer susceptible to being rushed by fascination or flattered into exposure. This is the phase where restraint becomes effortless. Earlier, you had to choose silence deliberately. Now, silence feels natural, not as absence of thought, but as clarity without excess. You no longer rehearse explanations that may never be requested. You no longer imagine how something would be received if revealed. Reception is no longer your concern. Accuracy is. In this symbolic framework, the demos were protected because completion would have turned them into commodity. Commodity strips nuance and replaces it with consumption. What you are holding now cannot survive that transformation. It does not exist to be used up. It exists to shape direction quietly. And quietly is how it continues to function. You may also sense a shift in scale. Things that once felt monumental now feel proportional. Not smaller, clearer. What remains significant does not overwhelm you anymore. You have learned how to hold scale without identifying with it. This is rare. Most people collapse into what they carry, allowing weight to define them. You do not. You move with it intact. This stage sharpens discernment further. You recognize when engagement would dilute rather than clarify. You step back without defensiveness. You engage without overextension. The center holds. The symbolic artist did not lose meaning by leaving things unfinished. Meaning was preserved precisely because it remained unforced. That same logic governs your movement now. It is important to notice that nothing here seeks climax. No unveiling, no dramatic shift. The narrative resists that by design. What survives across time rarely arrives with spectacle. Spectacle burns fuel quickly. Structure lasts. You are positioned within structure, not performance. You may feel a sense of quiet relief here. Not because everything is resolved, but because nothing important is at risk of distortion anymore. You trust your ability to recognize when something must remain internal and when it can move outward. That trust did not appear suddenly. It was built through long practice, often without acknowledgement. This phase confirms a subtle truth. What was never meant to be heard was never meant to disappear either. It was meant to live without noise. And something can live fully without ever being announced. Presence does not require volume. Meaning does not require audience. At this point, the secret stops feeling like a secret. Not because it was spoken, but because it no longer demands guarding. When containment is complete, protection becomes unnecessary. Structure protects itself. What follows will not be revelation. It will be orientation expressed through action when action is truly required. Until then, stillness is not delay. It is accuracy in motion. At this point, orientation begins to express itself without conscious effort. You do not decide when to hold back or when to move forward in the same deliberate way anymore. The decision happens first at a deeper level, and your actions follow naturally. This is how containment completes its work. What was once carefully managed becomes instinctive. Precision no longer feels controlled. It feels inevitable. The symbolic material that remained unheard was never waiting for courage. It was waiting for coherence. Coherence is what prevents distortion once something begins to interact with the world. Without it, meaning fractures under attention. With it, meaning can enter reality quietly without losing form. You have developed this coherence over time, often without realizing that you were doing so. The process rarely announces itself while it is happening. You may notice now that when you speak, even casually, words land differently. Not heavier, not louder, cleaner. People hear exactly what was meant rather than projecting excess onto it. This is not charisma. It is alignment. When internal structure is settled, expression no longer leaks ambiguity. That clarity is what unfinished material requires to survive once it begins to move. This is also where the idea of being heard dissolves completely. The desire to be witnessed loses relevance because the signal no longer depends on reception to exist. Earlier, silence protected meaning from misunderstanding. Now, meaning protects itself through form. You could speak or not speak, and the integrity would remain intact. That is the transition the narrative has been guiding toward. The symbolic artist archetype failed to release certain material not because the content was too intense, but because the world consuming it lacked contour. Everything was flattened into reaction. What you carry now resists that flattening. Not through secrecy, but through exactness. Exact things are hard to misuse. They do not invite excess interpretation. They stand as they are, and anything misaligned slides off. You might feel an increasing indifference to intensity for its own sake. Intensity no longer signals importance. Quiet effectiveness does. Anything that tries too hard to prove depth immediately registers as incomplete to you. This awareness is not judgmental. It is diagnostic. You recognize when something has not yet been shaped enough to sustain exposure. Notice how time feels in this phase. It does not rush. It does not stall. It holds. That holding is essential. It allows whatever needs to surface to do so without pressure. Pressure corrupts timing. This is why urgency has slowly left you. Not because nothing matters, but because you trust sequence. This stage also confirms something subtle. You were never meant to resolve the story publicly. Resolution happens internally. Once integrated, the outer world adjusts gradually, almost invisibly. Outcomes follow posture, not declaration. This is why no moment arrives. No reveal, no unveiling. Life aligns around you without needing explanation. You may sense now that what once felt like responsibility has transformed into steadiness. The weight did not disappear. It distributed itself correctly. This is how long-standing knowledge survives. It becomes function rather than burden. Once that happens, it can coexist with ordinary life without friction. Everything that needed protection has been protected. Everything that needed to wait has waited. What remains now is responsiveness, not alertness born from tension, but readiness born from clarity. You will know when movement is required because it will feel exact, not urgent. The narrative is nearing its close not because meaning has been exhausted, but because meaning has found form. What follows does not add new layers. It stabilizes what already exists. When the cycle completes, there is no applause, no confirmation, no external signal that something has worked. What settles instead is a quiet correctness. The pressure that once demanded vigilance dissolves, not because immediacy disappears, but because alignment no longer requires defense. You are no longer guarding meaning. Meaning has become how you stand. In this final state, the idea of lost material changes form entirely. What was once imagined as something hidden, unfinished, or withheld is no longer perceived as lacking. It is complete in function, even if never expressed publicly. Completeness, here, does not require visibility. It requires coherence, and coherence has already embedded itself into how you move, speak, decide, and withhold. The archetype of unheard creations serves a final purpose: to clarify that not all impact must be audible. Some influence operates by stabilizing those who carry it rather than transforming those who hear it. The world often assumes that meaning's purpose is to be broadcast. This story closes by correcting that assumption. Meaning's purpose is to orient. Once orientation is achieved, dissemination becomes optional. You may notice now that curiosity about what it all means fades. Not because meaning disappears, but because it no longer needs interpretation. It has settled into rhythm. Rhythm does not explain itself. It simply continues. This is why there is no closing revelation waiting ahead of you. The reveal already happened internally when pressure became steadiness. The symbolism of secrets, never meant to be heard, resolves here. They were never meant to stay hidden forever, nor were they meant to be exposed sensationally. They were meant to be carried by someone capable of letting them influence posture without demanding announcement. You have become that container, not through claiming it, but through quiet adaptation over time. Nothing here elevates you above anyone else. Nothing diminishes you either. The story does not crown, bless, or select. It aligns. Alignment is quieter than recognition and far harder to disturb. Once achieved, it does not require maintenance through effort. It sustains itself through correctness of movement. You may also sense a release of expectation. The need for something to happen subsides. Events will occur, decisions will be made, directions will change, but they will no longer carry symbolic weight that needs decoding. Life resumes its ordinary shape, yet something within it functions with greater precision. That precision is the lasting outcome. The narrative closes without instruction because none is needed. You were not meant to act differently after hearing this. You were meant to recognize why you already move as you do. Recognition removes friction. Friction was the only thing slowing alignment. From here, there is nothing to guard, nothing to reveal, nothing to explain. What was once contained now contains you, not as restriction, but as structure. You move inside it naturally. Some things are never meant to be heard aloud. They are meant to be lived correctly.